star with that introduction. Well, fun fact, many years ago, I was in a Bollywood film with Shah Rukh a long time ago. So you have an analyst and a movie star in front of you today. So look, guys, business has never been easy. I think we can all agree to that. And for the last 17 years, you and your colleagues have attended this event to share in your common problems and to plan for the future. Yeah. So firstly, we thank NASSCOM for this platform, really. And the reason why you're listening to me today isn't so much to learn about how geopolitics will impact the tech industry, because you can feel that already in your industries, right? But more fundamentally, what I'm here to do today is to teach you how to think about global affairs. Because sharpening your analytic tools is akin to making sure your tools are in working order when providing your products and services. But unfortunately, this practice is probably one of the least exercised muscles in the anatomy of business leaders today. So if there's one thing that you should take away from this talk, and one thing only, it should be this. The only way to prepare for volatility in times of crisis is by using first principles thinking. It will be your guide, and it will help you win. So my proposition to you all today is a simple one. For the next 30 minutes, what I want from you is your undivided attention. And in return, I'll do two things. Firstly, I'll set the tone for this event. And secondly, and more importantly, what I'm going to do is give you a framework of thinking about global affairs that you can bring back to your organizations to plan for future volatility, to manage risk better, right? And to also raise your standards when it comes time to business resilience. Deal? Okay? And the way I'm going to do this is in three parts. Firstly, I'm going to teach you how to think in first principles about global affairs. Then we're going to show India's growth trajectory using this framework, okay? And thirdly, I'm going to teach you about the momentum of how geopolitics actually operates in the world, okay? So this is what's going to happen in the rest of this talk. And for us to do this properly, we have to first of all start off by understanding that for the entirety of human existence, success in business has been predicated on how well business leaders understood and navigated these two following questions. First of all, what do we sell? And who do we sell it to? These two questions are universal and applicable no matter if you're Dell Technologies, Capgemini, IDA Ireland, right, MathWorks, or your local street food vendor. What do we sell, and who do we sell it to? They may seem like deceptively simple questions, but just like the Big Bang, what results is a universe of knowledge and improved strategy. What do we sell? Who do we sell it to? So let's get into it. Now, the first pillar, what do we sell? There's a reason why Apple makes iPhones, right, and why Capgemini does consulting. There are certain things which restrict and which liberate you in business, which you must understand the tempo of. So under the what do we sell to, we have things like evolving demand drivers, not the demand itself, but what drives the demand of your clients and your end users, where you fit in your supply chain, the cost of production, which changes, the supply of skilled labor, and also competition dynamics, right? And on the who do we sell to side, we have things like the future of market access, which is a big topic, especially given what's happening these days. A supply chain resilience, which again is a very big topic. And also tariff and non-tariff barriers, and importantly, geopolitical risk. Now, I would bet that there are some things in this list that you innately understand better, right, and you can forecast more confidently. Would I be correct in saying that? Would I also be correct in saying that those things are probably in the what do we sell section of this graph, right? And would I also be correct in saying the reason why you're more confident in that, as opposed to the who do we sell to, is because number one, you're more exposed to these things, and with that, you have more control over the dynamics that shape these phenomena, right? Which will then lead me to think that the reason why you're not so confident into the who do we sell to is because you don't have control over the dynamics that shape these phenomena. So really, quite obviously, what you guys need to do and what I'm going to help you do today is to increase your confidence in understanding the things you don't control. Okay? So that's what's going to happen. And the way in which we're going to do this is the following. when we talk about how the world is evolving, the thing we need to keep in mind is that the one thing that really controls and dominates the future market access, supply chain resilience, tariff and non-tariff barriers, and geopolitical risk, the one thing that controls all of these things is power. And more specifically, state power or government power, which is the highest form of power. Why? Well, quite simply, governments and nation states are sovereign. They're the most senior level decision-making authority on this planet today that we've created as human beings. And as such, they're the target of lobbying efforts by corporations, investors, other governments, terrorist organizations, and other domestic, regional, and international stakeholders. So understanding what motivates them and what drives them and what pressures they have is of utmost importance. But what is power? Right? Books have been written about this topic, but unfortunately, they've never had a business angle to them. So you could read all the philosophers of the past, but understanding what this means for you guys is what's important. Now, I'll tell you what power isn't. Power isn't me forcing you to do what I want. Trump forcing India to do what it wants through tariffs. That's more a result of power. But power, quite simply, is this. It's the ability of a country to secure their own interests. I'll say that again. It's the ability of a country to secure their own interests. So how does the government do this? What levers do they pull which they can use to secure the interest of their nation and also of the industries within their nation? And in your case, the tech industry in India. We've thought about this and we've created something called the Centers of Power model to help you think about it. Since we're talking to engineers, you need to have systems in place. So this Centers of Power model essentially says that governments have 6 ways in which they can secure their interests. These include things like their active consumer markets, their military balance, their technological leadership, their systemically important commodities, their geostrategic positioning, and their financial strength. No matter what country you are, no matter what time period you lived in, whether you're an empire, principality in our country, these 6 levers is what you've had. So to make this actionable to a room like this, what we needed to do is to quantify these 6 measures and rank 194 countries against them to see how countries fell on this. And then what we did is we backdated the data over the last 30 years to see the trends in countries. So that led us to create the Global Power Index. But within the Global Power Index, you also have the 6 centers of power as sub-indices. So you can triangulate how countries have evolved and moved throughout time. So would you like to see how India ranks in our latest ranking of the Global Power Index? Yes? Yes? Okay, now where do you think India would rank? Hand up for number 1. Number 1. Okay. Number 2. High. Number 3. 4. 4. 5. Okay. Who's right? Yeah, give yourselves a round of applause. Now, what do we see in this picture? What do you analyze? What can you see? Well, quite simply, I think the top 3 countries, 2 of them are in Asia, and number 1 is in Western Europe. No country on this list is from the African continent, and no country in this list is also from the Middle East, despite the news stories that you hear. Let's dive in deeper into this chart. What do we see here? This is the scoring. The index is ranked between 0 to 100, right? So you see United States of America, China, and India. But look at the gap between India and China. Despite the last 30 years of progress, India still lags behind the 2 top countries. If you had more time, I could dive into why this is the case, but this is what the data shows us, at least. So this is the gap that you need to close. This is the gap that this industry and this conference here over time needs to close to be competitive and to transform into what the future will hold. Okay, so this is your target. So if I'm here again next year or the year after, or the next 10 years, I want to see this much, much smaller, if not India on top. So let's see these dynamics, at least in the top 3 more clearly. So this is the evolution of the rankings over the last 30 years. What do we see here? For those who can't see, I'll go through it. India in 1994 started off in 7th place. 7th place, India. Over the years, it's closed the gap, but has remained in 3rd place since 2010. And has been in 3rd place ever since. The top 2 countries, again, China and the US, has remained consistent in their ranking. And some of the biggest countries which have moved We have South Korea and Brazil in different contexts have moved. The reason why these three places are for very different reasons we have to understand. So we can't paint it with the same brush because they all have different dynamics to them. India is strong in some cases, the US stronger in others, but this is what the data shows us on a top level. Now if we're going to look at, I'll explain what this chart shows, but the top three countries we're going to dive into a little bit more deeper to see how we've seen this evolution. Now you see India in blue, don't think that the highest one means the better one. 1 essentially means the top country, right? And 10 to 12 is the ranking. So the higher the country, the least powerful it is. So across the different indices, this is how India, China, and the US has ranked in 2023. And if you look here in terms of the scores, you can see how far ahead and behind India is to the other two countries. So you can see what gaps they need to fill, right? And where they're ahead already. So there's only so much the tech industry can do to close this gap, but in your sector, at least in the technology sector, you can see the gap that these countries have. Now, if you look at the technological leadership index as well, we have to see some of the main trends across the time. The biggest movers in technology over the last 30 years have naturally been India and China, starting off in 91st place and let's say 80th place. And over the last 30 years, we've seen the boom, right? But we've seen India take a much volatile, I suppose, trajectory over the years to see where it's going to in the technological leadership index, by the way, right? We're not looking at the global power index here. And we can see again, some of the top countries have remained top in different ways, for different reasons across time, which tells us that it takes a hell of a lot of effort to move into the top echelons. But once you're there, you tend to remain there because you've learned where your value add is, and if you're smart, you keep it and you expand into the future. Now, if you had more time, we could go into why this is the case and how you should be thinking about it, but this is what the data shows us for India. Across time, very volatile, but once you're there for good. And hopefully into the future as well. Let's talk about the geopolitical risk matrix and how that operates. Because it's important for you guys to understand the tempo of how geopolitics moves. What you see in the news is not always the truth. You know, being on TV by yourself often, they want to get you for a quick soundbite, and you don't have the chance to see the full extent of geopolitics. But it has different tempos, different speeds, and different dimensions of how it operates. So if we were to place it on this, we have the speed of geopolitics. We have geopolitics that moves fast and slow, aspects of that does this, right? And you can place some of these things in there to see how it happens. So tariffs, pretty fast, FX risk, sanctions, energy prices, trade deals, war, and global governance, okay? Some of these things may impact you directly, some of these may impact you in a secondary way, in a tertiary way, over time. But then also we have the bilateral and global aspects to geopolitical risk that you have to understand. So if we were to place markers between them, we have geopolitical risk that impacts you within days and weeks, within months, right? Speaking to the organizers here, your time trajectory is between 12 to 18 months typically. So that's the range in which you look at for immediate business impact. You have also geopolitical risk that impacts you over the years and also over the decades. But the problem is, because of what you're doing in day-to-day work, you tend to only focus on the short term. Not because it's your fault, because that's how business is organized. So you need people on your team who have a much longer term view on how this will impact. NASSCOM does a great job in doing this to bring you guys together, but within your own organizations, you must have teams and you must have a mentality and a discipline to see how the world is changing beyond your borders. Naturally, because you serve a Western audience mostly for your products and services, you need to see how they're thinking and how they're evolving to see how it impacts you. And if you do decide to transition your customer base away from America and from the West due to the volatility, you must understand where the future is and why the future is in that direction. We also have impacts that hit you globally through blocks and regions. Through blocks, I mean things like BRICS, right, which isn't a geographical entity, but it's more, I suppose, an ideological one, if you want to put it that way. And why they evolve is important. And also you have, you know, risks and geopolitics that hit bilaterally, right? So this intersecting matrix and where different points exist on this framework is really, really important. Because if you don't understand it this way, you're really at risk of watching what the news does and sticking your mind into volatility and in risk, when you should really be thinking about evolving with the times so that you can meet the future where it is and help shape the future, because India is in a very strong position. And sometimes, from what we see, they don't take the advantage that they do in this for different reasons. So if we were to place the risks we saw over the timeline that we see, where you're not restricted by what taxes your end consumer has to pay, but living in a situation where this would have been a thing of the past. But we see things come back, used by different players to enact their own will, right? To enact their own interests on you. And this again goes over, weeks, months, years, and decades. Global governance is another one which is important. This is not only talking about things like regulation and what happens at the UN, but what standards is India going to set in terms of the regulatory framework into the future? Do you lead in it or do you just follow? Which is super important. Trade deals as well, and how India, for example, the recent signing with trade with the UK, Trump now really wants to ensure that he presses the EU to put sanctions on you guys as well, because there's an arc to a story that says the more pressure we place on the end consumer, in this case oil, the better chance we have at solving the Ukraine crisis. A far cry from what he said, we'll fix the war within one day. But this is the nature of the world we live in. Naturally, with all of these things, the impacts are global. Naturally, with all of these things, the world we live in. Naturally, with all of these things, the impacts are global over time. So the position that India plays is super important, because if you don't take the opportunity to really focus on where your value add is, what you can add to the future of your industry, you're really left in a place where your industry only moves in the direction that you are closely aligned with. So the three things that I think an organization like this needs to really understand and learn about for the future is the following. We live in a time where the rules of the game have been changing always. This is not a new phenomenon. And I'm sure within your own organizations and within your own teams, you've seen changes technologically in terms of market access and others. But we're in a time now where looking at the global picture becomes even more important. Because if you do decide as an industry to move your attention away from the West and either try to innovate internally, find a customer base inside your own country, then this is going to be the most important pivot that you will make. But it won't happen overnight. It won't happen over the next 5 years or 10 years. This is a multi-decade approach that you need to take. So when you're planning for the future, when it comes time to these things, or looking at the present and seeing how you navigate and how you mobilize yourself, it's really, really important. Let me take a moment to also talk about the BRICS, because it's been on the news often, and we see alliances grow and we see alliances fade over time. But what's important for me to understand is that for these alliances, we need to understand the tempo of them. The BRICS really didn't start off as an invention by the BRICS itself. The BRICS was actually invented by Goldman Sachs. Jim O'Neill, who was the chief economist then, wrote a white paper talking about how the world needs better BRICS, talking about the 4 countries involved, and how these countries are going to play an outpaced bigger role in global affairs and in the economy. So this idea was taken up by the BRICS itself and was taken on as an ideological project which took shape and evolved over time. Now the part India plays in this is a very special one compared to the others, because India is one of the only perhaps non-aligned countries in this bloc that has done a very good job over the years in making sure that its intention is for the growth of India and its intention is for the betterment of India without picking sides. But in the world we live in now, countries are forced to pick sides. So what you do as an industry and how you communicate with your teams and how you communicate with policymakers is going to be some of the most important conversations you will have. NASSCOM, I'm sure, does an excellent job in making sure that you and your interests are shown to governments. But for you to really get the best out of them, you need to plan your own trajectories and help governments understand what the impacts of geopolitics, macroeconomics, and all the others is to your industry. You can't rely on them just to absorb it without any input from your organizations. Now, as a startup movement, BRICS may sound like a good idea. You're trying to find new alliances based on values and based on a on a service offering that is unique to you. But what happens? What happens if and when BRICS succeeds? And do we truly understand what the motivations is for the BRICS nations? And are we all, meaning the countries involved, in alignment to how these ambitions are actually put on paper? And if we're not in alignment, how are your voices going to be transmitted to the policymakers of India to tell them we are either for or against this movement, right? How much do you know about what the changes through BRICS will actually mean to your industry? Is it a good idea for you to buy into this new project because you see opportunities or because of whatever reason you have? So in keeping a good line of communication with governments is in your pursuit of growth, innovation, and development is probably some of the most important questions you're going to have. Because we can see, for example, what China's interest would be in this, right? Russia's interests are quite pressured now because they're in a position where anything against the US is what they need and what they want to have. So they're on a rallying cry to bring more members into this coalition and to try to find a way to use the disgruntlement of nations to their advantage when putting together this assembly of nations. But how valuable is it for India, right? How much do you believe in this project, in this ideal? These are the kinds of questions you need to be having on a daily basis within your organizations. You need to have teams within teams who can see the global picture, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, and then plan in terms of how do you deal with these challenges. And if there's gaps in your knowledge, don't only rely on the easiest places to get the knowledge, but go to the source, right? Read the documents that come out of the BRICS conferences, see what they're saying, see if you buy into the vision, see if the vision in your sense is even palatable, and then make sure you have an industry-wide response to this so that the position of tech in India is not sort of hazy, but it's very focused. And the more you do this over time, the more you have a chance to ingratiate yourselves into not only looking at what's happening now, but looking into the future. You will be in probably one of the best positions to manage and to navigate these issues over time. And if you don't do that, well, you'll be at the mercy of what comes next, and who wants to be there? Confidence in the Indian market may dwindle because your assertiveness and your stances on these topics aren't going to be clear. And if your end users continue to be the West, then how do you work with them to find out where their pressures are in this? Because it's not only a one-way street, because I'm sure your clients and your customers and their end users are feeling the impacts of what's happening today. And the one thing that does arise from all these countries trying to secure their own interests over time are four things, what we call the Global Four, and Rajesh actually alluded to it in his talk. So in our point of view, what happens is that as all these countries vie for influence in securing their own interests, they will use the centers of power matrix to enact what they want. And if the policymakers are smart, they'll do this not holistically. They'll focus on a few industries first because that's all the time they have, and they'll make sure that they maximize themselves on these things. But as time evolves, what tends to happen is that four things tend to arise when countries vie to secure their own interests. We call it the Global Four. First of all, globalization doesn't die, it becomes even more important. When people say that we're splitting away from globalization, it's not happening anymore, I'm sure you see in your industries it's nonsense. The world has always been globalized and will continue to be globalized through software predominantly and also through trade. Although trade is having a hard time of products now, but it certainly won't die off because you have more than just the American markets to work with. The next thing that arises is geopolitical risk or geoeconomic risk, right? Or geo-risk in general. You can add anything else afterwards. Politics, economics, technological becomes even more important. The next thing is that technological, transformational technology in your industry is at scale. No longer do you have to physically have a hardware in front of you. Software is king, and that will continue to arise and will continue to impact the world in many different ways. And also, finally, societal change. And with this I mean not only ideas of ESG and also consumer sentiment, but these things acting in tandem together to lead innovation in different directions. But these things aren't happening in their own individual cells. They're combining and they're coalescing together, impacting your industry in different ways. And what results out of that, right, is up to you. How do you take the lead in this, and how do you understand these factors? Because although this room may be engineering and design, wholesale, vertical integration of understanding the risks and challenges needs to be primary for you and your teams. You can't just have certain teams doing this and certain teams not doing this. It needs to be a whole organizational approach. This comes from leadership. Leadership needs to drive this, and I'm sure many leaders of companies are in this room today learning about how to do this better. And the charts that we showed you here is just a taste of where India can go into the future and how are your interests secured as corporations, not only governments and countries, but how do you create your own version of the centers of power matrix in your own organizations, right? What actually comes out of this for you? How do you create your own version of this for your own organizations? What do you have at your disposal to secure your own interests over the time period that you deem the most appropriate to plan, right? Is it, again, your consumer base? Is it this, in fact? Is it this? But what do we sell, right? Is this what you look at? Who do we sell to? How do you create your own risk matrix and your own development matrix that is understood by the top leadership team and is disseminated throughout your organizations to ensure you have a whole organizational approach to this? And I have to stress this point because people say we do this, we're great, but then when tested, there's gaps in knowledge, there's misalignment, and that's what causes organizations to move slowly. And slow in this pace of change is a killer. You must move not only fast, but must move with intelligence. So having an approach where you understand not only what's happening, but why is the world moving in this direction is key. Why is always the most important question. And the way you do this, and I'll leave you with this, is by number one, using first principles thinking. And as engineers, I'm sure you're probably more exposed to this than many other teams are. So there's things that your teams can learn from you and you can learn from them, okay? Setting your timelines. Not all risks are obvious immediately. Some take time to evolve and to change. So how do you and your teams understand this and plan for this? And what questions do you ask about the change that's happening? Do you know how to ask the right questions? Where do you go for the information to get this information? And how is this approach disseminated within your own organizations? If you don't have an approach to this now, you must develop one, okay? And thirdly is sharing insights with your own communities. NASSCOM being a primary platform, but within your specific sectors and your own specific verticals, what lessons can you learn from each other, right? What's worked, what hasn't worked? What teams and organizations are doing a better job than you in ensuring they're securing their own interests? And how is this coming together as a whole organizational approach? And with this, I'd like to thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.